My name is Tim Purvis. I'm the Associate Secretary at Ministry and Church Vocations, and I'm going to be one of the presenters today. My co-presenter today is Liz Brewer. Liz is the Program Manager for Ministry and Church Vocations. And what we're going to do today is an introduction to the candidacy process. So the first part of it is we're going to do just a kind of a general overview of the pathway that candidates for ministry take to become ministers of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And then the second part, we're going to focus on the initial parts of the certification process, really. And part two of the webinar is going to be next week. And next week, we're going to focus on the guidance conference and the psychological testing part of the candidacy process. So Liz, if we could do screen sharing. And at the conclusion of the webinar, we're going to do a bit of a presentation, and we're going to have a question and answer time. So all right, so an overview of the candidacy process. Let's begin with some of our basic, the theological basis. We believe in our Presbyterian and Reformed tradition that every Christian has a vocation or a calling to follow and serve Christ. And so part of our faith journey is working out what that means for us over the course of our lives. In what way and how are we called to follow and to serve Christ? We also believe that there are some there we go. It's just a little slow. I'm hitting all my slides at once. Some are called to serve the church in a special way as ministers of Word and Sacrament. And we believe that this vocation to ministry, this calling to ministry of Word and Sacrament, has an inner and an outer dimension. And the inner dimension is the individual's listening for God's voice and calling. I sometimes refer to this as the vertical aspect. This is the conversation that the individual has with God, where they sense God's inner call to serve as a minister of Word and Sacrament. But there's also an outer dimension as well. And I call this the horizontal aspect, because the church is also involved in this call process. And this is where the church listens to and for God's call to the individual. And our candidacy process, the church tests this and affirms, in many cases, this outer dimension of the call. And the candidacy process is basically the framework. It provides the process for this vocational preparation and discernment, for the testing of the inner call and the outer dimensions of the call. I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she is going to talk about, do the overview. So you want to be a Presbyterian minister.
Yes, so you want to be a Presbyterian minister. The first step is active membership in a Presbyterian Church in Canada congregation for at least 1 year. This allows the congregation and particularly the session to get to know that individual and gives the individual time to get to know at least a small part of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Potential candidates normally have an undergraduate in order to pursue the candidacy process. There are exceptions to that. If a mature candidate lacks an undergraduate degree, that person may apply to the Committee on Education and Reception, and they would get permission to follow what we'd call a non-standard educational pathway. Education reception is a whole thing on its own. So we're not going to talk too much about that in this presentation, but we do have a webinar, a pre-recorded webinar on the PCC website about that if you'd like more information. The next step, when an individual who's been a member for at least the previous year of the congregation is interested in pursuing ministry, the session meets with that prospective candidate. Depending on how well the session knows the person, they may request the person to submit a resume, some references, a statement of faith. They may have a formal interview with the person, and there are questions in the Book of Forms Appendix J that give some guidelines about what would happen in that session interview. Provided the assessment is positive, then the session would write to the presbytery requesting certification. The presbytery interviews prospective students. This is normally done by a subcommittee or a smaller group within the presbytery, a student certification committee or ministry committee. And if it discerns that it's appropriate for this individual to enter the church's candidacy process, then the presbytery certifies that person as a candidate for ministry. And then the person will start their education. So the Master of Divinity is the standard that our ministers have. It's a 3-year program. Normally, again, following what we'd call the standard educational pathway, candidates would receive their Master of Divinity degree from one of the 3 Presbyterian Church in Canada theological colleges. If a candidate is already enrolled or has already graduated with a Master of Divinity from a non-PCC theological college, again, that's not a big problem. They would just apply to education and reception. Again, not going to go into the details here. So once the person has been certified, and they're in their studies doing that sort of stuff, then we have what we call the guidance conference. This is a 4-day conference that all candidates must attend. It is normally ideal for the person to attend once they finish their first year of full-time studies. For someone who's going part-time, that there's more flexibility in when they come, but kind of earlier in your educational process rather than later is better. So that you have time to work on, if there have been recommendations from the guidance conference, there's time to work on those and still continue your studies and that sort of stuff. The next step in the process, these can happen at the same time, they're not necessarily sequential, is the psychological assessment. This, again, normally occurs during your first year of studies. The college is the one who has a list of approved psychologists, and they help you go through that process. So that's why we say normally during the first year of studies. The second, as Tim mentioned, the second part of this presentation next week is going to go into much more detail about guidance conference and psych testing and that sort of stuff. So we'll just kind of leave it at that for now. So the presbyteries have to meet with candidates at least annually, or perhaps more often if warranted, to review the candidate's standing. When the presbytery discerns that it should continue to encourage the individual along the pathway toward ministry, it will either extend the initial certification of that person. And so that would happen if the person hasn't gone to guidance conference or done their psych testing yet, then the presbytery would extend their initial certification. If the person has already gone to guidance conference and psych testing, then the presbytery would be looking at recertifying the person as a candidate for ministry. And then during the candidate's final year of theological studies, they can request that the presbytery examine them for certification for ordination. This is kind of a big process. You can find more details about this again in the Book of Forms in Appendix J, but it's a more in-depth interview process than the recertification interviews. And then in the candidate's final semester of theological studies, the colleges, the faculty meet to discern if the graduating candidates should be given permission to seek a call before they graduate. This normally happens around February 1st or October 1st, whichever is in that candidate's final semester. If the college gives the candidate permission to seek a call and the candidate has been certified for ordination by their presbytery, then that person can begin to look for a call before they graduate. If one of those two parts hasn't happened yet, a candidate cannot search for a call. So sometimes we talk about, the 2 keys that you need for the nuclear weapon. You need to have both, otherwise you stop right there and you have to wait. And once that person is able to search for a call, that candidate, then they can start contacting interim moderators and search committees and being interviewed, which hopefully will lead to ordination and induction. I forgot to mention, just when the person, after the examination for certification for ordination, hopefully the presbytery then certifies that person for ordination, or as a candidate for ordination. If the person hasn't graduated yet, that certification is pending graduation. Once they've graduated, that condition is lifted, and it's just the person is certified for ordination. So I'll hand it back to Tim for the next section.
Liz has painted it in broad strokes, an overview of our candidacy process. And I want to talk specifically in a little bit more detail about the certification process and the presbytery's role in this process. After a candidate has been certified or recommended to presbytery as certified candidate by their session, the presbytery usually meets with the candidate, and it's usually the Students in Education Committee or Ministry Committee. There's a subcommittee of the presbytery anyway that looks after student candidates, and they meet with the candidate and interview the candidate for their initial certification. The interview questions, and Liz mentioned this earlier, for this and for all stages of certification can be found in Appendix J of the Book of Forms. So sometimes we get asked, well, what are the kinds of questions that the presbytery is going to ask me in my certification interview or my recertification interview? Well, they're found in the back of the Book of Forms in Appendix J. Now, some of the questions that the presbytery may ask in the initial certification interview may be to ask the candidate to articulate their understanding and their sense of how God is calling them into ministry of word and sacraments. They may ask questions about their gifts, to identify their gifts for service in the church as an ordained minister. They may ask questions about who their role models for ministry are, who the people are that they know and who have influenced them in their understanding of who a minister is, what a minister does. They may ask questions about the candidate's own understanding of ministry at this particular point in their journey. They may also ask questions about whether the candidate appreciates and understands the role of the wider church, and particularly the authority of the presbytery, in the candidacy process. Now, initial certification cannot be conditional. If the presbytery has some concerns about whether or not the individual should be certified at this point, they don't certify. And they may have a conversation with the individual about indicating maybe some more thinking that they need to do, or something that they need to do before they may approach the presbytery again for certification. And as Liz mentioned, presbytery continues to meet with the candidates at least annually after that initial certification, just to check in some progress and to provide support and pastoral care on the part of the presbytery for their candidates. Recertification is the second aspect of this three-part certification process: initial certification, recertification, and certification for ordination. And recertification happens after the presbytery gets the guidance conference and the psychological testing reports. And again, if at the annual meeting with the candidate, if the guidance conference hasn't been completed, the psych testing hasn't been done, and the presbytery committee doesn't have the reports from these, then what they will do is extend the initial certification rather than recertify. They'll wait until they get these reports before they do recertification. And again, it involves an interview. And some of the interview questions the presbytery might ask at this point have to do with their understanding a little bit more about their progress in their studies and in their thinking and in their preparation for the ministry of word and sacrament. They may ask how the candidate's faith is changing or developing through their theological studies. They may ask about any theological insights that the candidates may have had, and how those insights are integrated into their own faith and living. They may ask questions about the types of ministry at this point that the candidate sees themselves serving in: congregational ministry, chaplaincy, non-congregational ministry, rural ministry, inner city ministry. What kind of ministry does the candidate sense at this point that God might be calling them to? And they may also ask for the candidate to produce their own written statement of faith, to write their own creed, as it were. And all of this, plus the information in the guidance conference report and the psychological testing report, can form the basis for some of the questions that the presbytery may want to explore with the candidate in their recertification interview. Recertification, unlike initial certification, can be conditional. The presbytery may have some concerns about the candidate's calling at this point, or their gifts, or their suitability for ministry. Not major and significant concerns, but some concerns. And some of these concerns could arise from items that they see in the guidance conference or the psychological testing report. And so the presbytery may agree to certify them, but to put a condition on their certification. So, for example, the presbytery may approve recertification on the condition that the candidate is able to more clearly articulate their sense of call to ministry, or that the candidate have some short-term counseling to deal with some personal issue that the presbytery has noticed and sees that they would need to work on in order to be effective in ministry. Perhaps the presbytery may certify them conditionally on the resolution of some faith issue that they are struggling with. And the presbytery may make as a condition meeting with a mentor to get to have some conversations about the nature of ministry to help them grow in their thinking. Usually, these the conditions are short-term things that generally over the course of a year or so, between certification and certification for ordination, that the candidate can deal with. And the final step, and this is the big one, is the examination for certification for ordination. And here, this is something that the candidate in their final year of study would approach the presbytery and request that this interview for certification for ordination happen. The presbytery would request written material from the candidate. For example, a statement of intent to proceed to ordination, and in that statement of intent, that they would accept the preamble to ordination, the subordinate standards of the church, and the ordination vows of the church as they are set out in the Book of Forms. So presumably they've read all of that and they've looked it over, and they can say, yes, I want to proceed to ordination because I am okay with all of this. The presbytery will ask for a statement of their faith journey to this point. And they will also ask them to do a case study in ministry, some experience in ministry that they've had, that they've thought about, reflected upon, and analyzed. And all of this will become part of and the basis for the major interview that the presbytery will have for certification for ordination. If the presbytery certifies the individual for ordination, this means that the candidate at this point is eligible to seek a call. And again, they also need not only certification for ordination, but the permission of the college. This goes back to that double permission that Liz was talking about earlier. So if your presbytery says you're certified for ordination, and your college gives you a letter that says, yes, we give you permission to seek a call, you're off and running. Those are the final conditions before a candidate is eligible to seek a call. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Book of Forms Appendix L, sometimes known as the remits, because there have been questions and concerns that have come up in the candidacy process about this. What can presbyteries ask? What should presbyteries ask? Can they not ask of candidates for ministry? Well, the first thing is that candidates should not be asked about their sexual orientation. Right? That question is out of bounds in a certification or at any point in the candidacy process. If a candidate, however, freely chooses to disclose this information, that they identify as an LGBTQI person, this shouldn't make any difference in our candidacy process. This is not a reason or grounds to disqualify a person from being a minister of Word and Sacrament in the church. So what kind of questions then can the presbytery ask? Well, presbyteries might want to ask if the candidate understands and accepts the church's position. This is now the doctrine of the church, that there are two parallel definitions of marriage, and people are free to hold and act upon the definition of marriage they feel is appropriate. So, do you understand that this is the position of the church? Two parallel definitions of marriage. Candidates, presbyteries might also ask the candidates if they feel that they can live well with the church's decisions on human sexuality. They might want to ask questions about how the candidate would work with or engage with others who may hold a different understanding or a different definition of marriage. So working together in the church. If you really want to do a deep dive into all of the aspects of our candidacy process in the Presbyterian Church in Canada, there is a document available online. You can download it in PDF form through the Ministry and Church Vocations website and at other places on the website. The candidacy process, and it goes into everything. It will tell you in all kinds of detail about every aspect of the candidacy process. So if this is something that you want or need to learn more about, please feel free to do that. All right, that's basically our presentation, our Cook's tour of the candidacy process and the certification process. And in the next little while, we just want to open the floor for any questions or comments or discussion.
And we're going to turn off the recording now, so feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And we'll probably stop sharing our screen as well.
Charles, your hand's up.
My hand is up. I finally have figured out the technology to do that. Yeah.